right. So, hello, everyone. My name is Joy. I'm the social media assistant here for the Day North America or USA. And I'm talking with Ethan Grindell today. So thank you so much for joining us and talking about short-term research grants with us.
Morning, Brenda. Thanks for having us. I'm Ethan Grandel. I'm the program officer for DAD, specifically for the short-term research grants, among a few other programs. So looking forward to doing this Q&A with you all. Looking forward to your questions afterward. And I think we'll start things off with just a short discussion between Brenda and myself and go over a few points of the short-term research grants, looking at those.
Yeah. So I guess my first question is just a general one. Who can actually apply for these sort of short-term research grants? Is it open to absolutely everyone?
Sure. So there are certain parameters in terms of looking for students who've completed at the minimum a bachelor's degree. A lot of our candidates are master's students or have completed a master's degree, PhD students, postdocs within a certain range. So I believe up to 3 years ABD or up to 4 after having received one's doctorate. And all the details are also on our website. So there are many more details there. But it's open to all disciplines. It's open to 1 to 6 months for a research stay in Germany. So if you're interested in doing research from between 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, up to half a year for a research span doing research in Germany.
Yeah, that's great. So it's mostly for doctoral students then. Is there another short-term research grant for other students then, or is it just doctoral?
So I can briefly mention a couple other programs. I would say that the primary audience for the short-term research grants turns out to be doctoral students, PhD students who are in the midst of their studies there. But as I mentioned earlier, we do have some students who have at the minimum just a bachelor's degree or just a master's degree, some postdocs as well. We also have a German Studies research grant for which the deadline is May 1st. That's a little bit more flexible. So we also have, I would say, more of a younger focus on that. So that's also another program that you can look into. The deadline for that, as I mentioned, is May the 1st, and also offers an opportunity for 1 to 2 months worth of research funded in Germany. If you happen to be a PhD, if you already have received your doctorate and you're more than 4 years beyond having received that, you unfortunately wouldn't be able to apply for the short-term research grant, but you could then look at our research stays, which also has the upcoming deadline for this year. It's May 17th. So in a little over a month, you can look at that, and that would be for faculty, for PhDs who have received that within the last 4 years, and you'd be able to apply for 1 to 3 months worth of research in Germany for that.
Okay, great. And when is the actual deadline for this short-term research grant, the upcoming one?
Definitely good to point out and highlight. So the upcoming deadline for the short-term research grants this year for May is May 3rd. It's a biannual deadline. So you can apply for the May application cycle, which will be May 3rd. There's then going to be the fall deadline since it's twice a year, the fall deadline being at the beginning of November. So that also segues into what I could briefly mention in terms of the months that would be eligible to do the research for. So if you're applying for the May deadline, you'll be able to start your research as early as October 1st of this year, as early as October 1st of 2021. That would be the soonest that you could start your research. But you could do it as late as April 30th would be the latest start date of 2022. So up to almost a full year after the application. If you were looking for applying, for instance, for summer research for 2022, then the November deadline would be the one that you'd be looking at and best suited to apply for. And then that would be the timing for you. But the May 3rd deadline is for research starting as early as October 1st of this year. Also something that I wanted to highlight that's very important. It's super critical to be on time with the deadline. And our website lays out the details of what the time is for that. And I believe it's 5 p.m. Eastern time, 11 p.m. European time. But it's very critical to start the application process early enough so that you can be sure to submit all your materials through that and not have any issues in terms of the timing. And we can touch on that again later, perhaps. But just wanted to be clear, May 3rd, 5 p.m. Eastern. So really important there.
Yeah, of course. And is the application only open to U.S. citizens?
Oh, so for the application, yes, permanent residents could also apply if they've been here for a year for the short-term research grant. But I would say the majority are U.S. or Canadian citizens then that are applying for the short-term research grant here through our New York office.
Oh, okay, great. And so you mentioned when the students would go abroad. Is there any way For example, would they know where they're going beforehand? Like, how do you find out where to research? Is that
Sure.
just an individual process?
Exactly, an individual process, and that's a question that we get from a number of applicants is how do I contact my host institution, or which host institution do I choose? The answer is you choose which host institution you would like to do research at. You choose the host institution that you feel like would be best suited for your research, and so that the onus is on the applicant. That's incumbent upon the ones who are applying to sort of do the research, look into the background with their specialization, and figure out this is the best place where I can accomplish the goal of my research. This is, the perfect match for that. And so then they would reach out to the host institution and be able to collaborate there, be able to have that tie set up in advance so that they can have the letter of supervision received from them, confirming that is all set up.
Okay, so you have to have permission from the host institution or find a host institution before you actually apply then.
Exactly. So part of the
Okay.
application process, along with getting the requisite documents, transcripts, writing your research proposal, etc., is also, I would say, a very important part is securing the host confirmation, the host invitation letter that confirms that you have their academic supervision, can use the workplace there, and that they're on board with your research there, and that's all set up.
Okay, perfect. So kind of more technical side of the application, what should the actual proposal look like? Like, is there a length requirement or like MLA or anything technical like that?
Sure, great question, and another common one. So what I would say for that, which can be a bit confusing because I know some applicants will be looking on the DE site from Bonn, and others will be looking at our North America site. The North America site is the one that we refer to. So when you make different lengths of page requirements, so 10 on the DE site and 5 for ours, the page requirement for the research proposal, maximum number of pages is 5. So please no more than 5 total pages for that. Although if it is going a little bit beyond in terms of citations or references, that's also all right. But 5 pages maximum, since that applies for our North American applicants. So applying through our New York office would be 5 pages max. And in terms of the formatting and the spacing is something else. There aren't hard or fast set rules per se that we have for that. So we've received some, single space, double space, font size 11, font size 12. I would say the main thing is just being sure that it's readable and reasonable. And as long as it's that, it's going to be fine.
Okay, that sounds good. So mostly the applicants should look on the DAAD North America site then, and do they apply on the German website or how does that work out?
So the application portal link is included, I believe, as well on our DAD North American site, and then the application will proceed through the portal. So all of the necessary steps, all of the things that you can upload will go through that portal process online. Something else to mention that we can also maybe perhaps touch on later, but if there are any issues in terms of portal or the technical support, then the email of our DAD portal team is also listed there. So that'll be portal@daad.de. And if you're running into technical issues, for instance, or anything, any kind of difficulties with the portal and need to get that rectified, they would be the ones who'd be best equipped to assist you with that. Something else that we suggest to our applicants, if you're having issues with the portal in terms of browsers, Firefox is probably the one that's best equipped to handle the portal design and encounters the fewest number of errors. So that's probably also an ideal suggestion if you're going through that. Firefox is the one that we recommend.
Okay, so I also sense that applying early is also the best in case there are any sort of technical issues. Hopefully there are very few technical issues, but that always does crop up now and again, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So the earlier the better. There won't be any difference in terms of whether or not your application, goes through the portal 2 weeks before, 1 week before, several days before. We do receive applications the day of, which is also fine. It's just super important for it to be before that deadline, the time, which, as I mentioned, is going to be 5 p.m. Eastern, 11 European, 11 p.m. European. On May the 3rd. If it's after that, there's nothing we can do to reopen the portal. So it's very important for that to be in advance of the deadline.
All right, sounds great. And when would the applicants know if they were accepted or have received the short-term funding?
Sure. So typically the results for the decisions are available 3 to 4 months after the deadline. So in this case, that would be August, probably later in August, perhaps at the latest by the early September, that the applicants would know the decisions and be able to plan and look ahead to that.
All right, and once the students know that they have gotten this application, the research grant, What if they are worried about COVID? Like, are there any options for virtual research grants?
Sure. So, in terms of planning ahead, the best reference so far, I would say, is what the past precedent has been, and naturally, this will be determined as the situation develops and we see what's happening in the months and the rest of 2021. In terms of what's been offered to past cycles, there has been the option to postpone up to 6 months if that is playing a factor in your research and wanting to delay that beyond 6 months. A reapplication has been required, but up to 6 months would be possible to defer for the past cycles. Again, being contingent on what's available for the upcoming one and what the situation and circumstances then dictate. There's also, I believe, been the option for online starts as well, again, for the past cycles. So perhaps depending on what the situation is, no one can really know what things will look like later this summer, but we've tried to be as accommodating with that as possible.
All right. Yeah. That sounds like a good thing just because the situation has been so turbulent as of late. So hopefully things stabilize soon. So, and I guess a question that kind of cropped up from that one, can students get funding more than once from the short-term research grant, or is it possible, only possible to get it one time?
Sure. So while it's not possible to receive more than one short-term research grant or more than one short or long-term research grant within the same year, it is possible to receive that subsequently after there's been that going into the next year. So if a student were to receive that for summer 2021, for instance, someone from the past application cycle, they wouldn't be able to reapply and receive funding for that same year, but it would be possible in the subsequent one. So not immediately in succession, but still not precluding the possibility to reapply and to receive further funding.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That sounds wonderful. And I guess one of the last questions that I have for you that I wrote. Oh, sorry. Actually, I think I went through all the questions. So I don't know if there's any other questions that students generally ask you. I'm sure that there's a lot of questions that come up now and again. So
Sure.
I don't know if you have any other ones that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, I'll take a look at my notes here. And of course, for any of you who are in the audience, feel free to add any of your own questions into the chat. We'll cover those coming up as well. Just looking over here, something else that comes up, I think, sometimes in terms of asking regarding the reference requirement. So also this is an adjustment due to applications in the time of COVID. The reference requirement had previously been required a hard copy to be sent to our office physically in New York. The reference requirement has been waived due to the pandemic at this point. So there isn't the requirement for you to send in the reference form. And to be clear, I'm talking about the reference form for your recommender, not the host letter of supervision, which is still required, but the reference form, the hard copy requirement for the reference form has been waived. So we no longer need the reference form, and everything can be done online through the application portal. If you don't submit the reference form, that won't have any kind of adverse effect on your application. At the same time, you're of course still welcome to submit the reference form, and it will be included and be there together with the rest of your materials. So I did want to briefly touch on that in terms of the reference form.
So are there any hard copies that the students have to send in?
No,
Okay.
nothing needs to be sent to the office here in New York. The reference requirement has been waived. Again, we're still accepting those. It's still possible to submit if you have a reference, if you have a recommender who is willing and able to do that, but it's not something that is going to count against you if it's not included, even though that had been a past requirement. In terms of digital reference, okay, so seeing some of the questions start to come in here, asking about digital references. I mean, you can also email that if that's sort of the last resort. We're still accepting the hard copies, I would say, and so you're more than welcome to submit a hard copy as a last resort. I would say the digital reference could be submitted. And in terms of the percentage of applicants that are awarded, that's somewhat difficult to say just because the application pool varies so much from year to year. But I would say the typical on the order of somewhere between a third and a sixth of applicants in an average application pool might receive funding. But of course, that's wildly contingent on just the numbers that apply, funding for each year, and so on. So there are a lot of specifics that are playing into that and a lot of different variables going into it. Yeah, talking about the selection committee. So this is something that's also touched on by some applicants wondering, for instance, how specific they should write their proposals, who's going to be reading the proposals. Is it going to be a professor in their exact discipline? Is it going to be a PhD that might be in a separate discipline. And so in terms of the selection committee, we have a number of professors who are on that, a number of full professors, and all of them are spread out through different disciplines. So while if you're applying, for instance, say your application is in 17th century art history, your application will probably not be read by a 17th century art historian, but at the same time, it will probably still be read by a humanities professor who's going to be familiar with enough depth that you could not have to write your proposal for a layperson per se. Again, in the sciences, if you're doing something in, biochemistry, it might not be, a biochemist with that specific focus, but it would still be someone in chemistry, biology, someone who's going to be familiar enough with that to pick up on the specificity that you'd be able to include with your proposal. Hopefully that's a helpful clarification for some of you who might be wondering that.
How big is this selection committee? Is it a large pool of people?
Sure. So as again, the applicant pool ranges from year to year. The selection committee also varies somewhat, but yeah, a handful of professors, maybe half a dozen an average year. But again, depending sort of on the applicant pool and makeup of that, I would say. Looking over my notes again just to make sure that there isn't anything else that's been omitted from the main points that I think we want to cover. I think those are the high points though, and I think a lot of the questions that I tend to get the most often. So yeah, if you're still in the chat and wondering if there's anything else that we haven't hit on or haven't addressed, feel free to type out your question there, and we can cover that in the time upcoming.
It does seem quite exciting to go to Germany. Hopefully, at this time, things will get better soon. So, fingers crossed that there's lots of applicants and they're able to enjoy Germany once again, once the borders and everything are cleared up. So,
yes, definitely. So, still certainly optimistic and hopeful for that coming through. Just to address another question there that's come up. Exactly. So matriculation at a U.S. or Canadian university would be fine for the short-term research grant, as long as you've been here for a year and you are matriculated there currently. In terms of third countries, then that's a separate issue in terms of if you've completed a degree at a U.S. or Canadian university, or then, for instance, studying in Italy or studying in Australia, something separate. But in terms of being here for the point, yes, we do have applications from international students who would, be studying at a U.S. or Canadian university, and that works for us as well.
I guess this is a specific question. I don't know if you can answer, but what about dreamers? Have there been any dreamers in the past who have applied, or is that possible for them to apply?
So that's not something that I'm currently aware of what the parameters are for that. But yeah, if there were any questions, then we could certainly, address those as they came up.
And there's another question in the chat: is source for exploring university opportunities?
Yeah, and so maybe I see your question there in terms of university opportunities. Maybe just asking kindly for a bit more clarification in terms of university opportunities. If you're talking about direct study, then that might be the study scholarship, one of the separate programs that we offer. But not entirely. Just to clarify what the university opportunity reference were there in terms of exploring that. So if you might be able to clarify. The research grant offers the opportunity to conduct the research in Germany for matriculating at say a German university for your master's degree. That would be something that funding would be available for through the study scholarship, with the fall deadline. That's an annual deadline for master's study at a German university directly. Sure, and so labs appropriate for a specific discipline. I think this sort of ties back into the question that you had mentioned earlier, Brenda, about finding the host institution. So for the short-term grants, exactly, for short-term research grants, given your background and connections and studies so far, then the applicant, I would say, is the one who's best equipped to determine which, whether it's a specific university or Max Planck Institute or something along those lines, where it is, with whom you want to work with, and wherever in Germany it is that's going to have the expertise and the facilities that are what you need, what's going to be the best match in terms of that research. Then that's the host institution that you should that we'd recommend reaching out to. That essentially that's the freedom incumbent upon the applicant to sort of construct their own host institution pairing, and you're able to reach out to them and secure their supervision, and that's what you can include in the application for that aspect.
I feel like personally, when I've been applying for these sort of scholarships, I've usually used my professors as resources and kind of pick their brains apart to see which universities would be the best fit for me. So probably, if possible, I don't want to say network, but if you have any professors that you feel comfortable talking about this with, and you're wondering about where you should go study, maybe talk with them or do your own research. Just so you can figure out what's the best place for you.
Yeah, absolutely. All good points there, Brenda. And so I see we have another question in here in terms of the PDF application for my host institution isn't listed. I just want to confirm that's not an issue. Exactly. So sometimes we have students who aren't using a university per se as their, if they're looking at a nonprofit or like a library, for instance, and that would be fine. Sometimes it's not a requirement, but you could also have a university, like a local university there, reaching out to them as a supplemental or a secondary host, just to have that additional backing and have that additional confirmation to say that the workplace would be available, and sort of buttressing the initial host support from wherever it is that you were looking at. But yeah, again, my impression as well is that it's not going to be the exhaustive list of all possible host institutions.
Okay, so when students are applying, then there's a list of host institutions, like a drop-down box then that they can choose from. So that's going in with the notion that they've already picked the university and then they'll just find it in the drop-down menu, correct?
Exactly, or in this case, perhaps not if it's not among those listed. But again, yeah, the impression not being that it's an exhaustive list per se.
Okay. Let's see, are there any other questions?
Review my notes to see if there's anything else that might make sense here to touch on.
Oh, I think I remembered one that I had. So is it possible to get funding outside of the short-term research grant, or are you only allowed to have the short-term research grant as the sole funding when you're over in Germany?
Right. Yeah. So that's another good point to ask about. So for the short-term research grants, as it's the case with many of the DAD grants, the aim, of course, is to foster research in Germany, and indeed research in Germany that might otherwise not be possible. And so, to that end, if there is additional funding that you would receive, another grant or scholarship from a separate organization, then that would be deducted in essence from your DAD funding, so that someone who are receiving, for instance, like a National Science Foundation grant of $5,000, that would be able to be concurrent with the DAD funding, and anything in excess of 450 euros would be deducted from the DAD funding. As a separate point, it's not possible to receive separate funding from a German source. So like another German source of funding for that wouldn't be compatible with the DAD grant regardless of any kind of reduction or deduction. So not possible, since we do want to sort of maximize the impact of that. And if there were a separate grant that you were receiving from another organization, then ideally there is no overlap and it would be successive rather than concurrent, so that there wouldn't be any kind of conflict and subsequent reduction with that.
And I see Peter has a question. So what makes a successful application? Are there any tips?
So I think what I preface any answer to this question with is the fact that each year the applicant pool is different, and we receive applications from all kinds of applicants. So there isn't an applicant with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and these are the essential and exclusive points that all of our successful applicants have. But rather, I would say that there is a variety of applicants that we receive and a variety of candidates that we support. So there isn't one particular mold. And given that the application is composed of all these separate components, each of them are playing a different role in that. That said, I would probably mention that the research proposal, the research statement for your proposed research, along with the host letter of supervision are probably two of the more critical documents. So, and I think that makes sense when you think about it. What is the research? What is the short-term research grant? It's your proposal to do this research in Germany. So being sure that you have, a refined research statement that talks about your goals, talks about what you want to achieve with this. I think the research statement is really important, and one of the first things that sort of has that priority or has that emphasis in terms of the application documents, along with the post letter of supervision, and making sure that that's also something that makes sense, something that is sensible for the discipline, has the right resources and expertise to support what you're proposing, and is a sensible pairing in that regard. In terms of a structure, I just see there's a follow-up to Peter's point on the application proposal. As with, and I mean, we received this question for the application proposal. We also receive it for the application timeline or timeframe schedule, which is a separate document. Again, this is sort of the freedom left up to you as applicants, which can be fun. We're not saying that you have to, start with X, follow with Y, end with Z. It's open-ended in terms of what you feel communicates best, what you're putting forth as your research proposal. So we don't have a template or an example or a form where it's like, this is your research proposal to be filled in. This is exactly what we need. And of course, a research proposal for physics is going to look different than a research proposal for art history or for for German. Those are going to be different kinds of the narrative of your background and what you're looking to achieve there. And so I feel like that will be reflected correspondingly in the research proposal. So there isn't a set structure for that. But again, I would just go back to the answer that it's important to lay out what you will be looking to, the specific set of goals that you're looking to achieve, why this makes sense, the justification for that, also including what your qualifications are, what sets you up for this success, and being able to go through this hopefully very well structured, very pragmatic and realizable research that you're excited for there. And in terms of the time schedule, again, we don't have a set template for that or something that has to be done in this way per se. Again, there's the freedom. I mean, some applicants will use sort of an outline form so that they're, the two separate columns. In the first 2 weeks, I will be working on, ABC. In the second, following set of 2 weeks, I'll be working on, DEF. Others will actually do a table so that it's also sort of linked there between the timeline that you have for the research that you're proposing and the different phases of it, so to speak, or the different objectives for the respective phases of that research. So again, that's sort of open-ended, and the freedom, I would say, left up to the applicants in terms of what you feel like is the best reflection of your research proposal, what you feel like is the best structure for that, and what makes the most sense in terms of making that clear and transparent for your application.
Yeah, and I feel like personally, whenever I've done any sort of research proposals, the things that have helped me the most are having someone to look over my work. So if there's ever anyone you feel comfortable with, just to look over things and make sure things are clear and concise. To edit your work is always the way to go when submitting any sort of application. Just because, and even though something sounds perfectly logical in our heads, sometimes when it's written out, it doesn't make sense. So this is just me waxing on that everyone should use an editor, pretty much.
Definitely, yeah. I think attention to detail in the application is always appreciated and reflects positively.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if there are any questions, other questions.
I'll revisit my notes to make sure there's nothing else that come up in the interim. But yeah, feel free to add anything there if you're still in the chat wondering and curious about something. Happy to address that here.
Well, let's see. I think that we're at around half an hour. And if there are no other questions, do you have any parting words? What do you think, like anything specific you want to say to the people who are applying?
Yeah, let's see, parting words. I mean, certainly we're in unprecedented times, but it's really heartening to see the enthusiasm and interest that is still there for the future possibilities in Germany. And I think that certainly it's a great program, it's a great opportunity, and hopefully a great fit for you if you're interested and sort of have an idea of what you're looking towards, maybe a host institution in mind, these different goals for your research. I think probably the main thing, I guess, just taking away, I mean, each applicant is different. So, I mean, you know best, you're the best resource for you in terms of what will make the most sense for your application, what will reflect, your enthusiasm and what you've been able to refine in terms of this project that you're excited about and looking towards Germany for. Naturally, we are also available, so you can feel free to reach out to me directly as the program officer, in my email, which you can also find on the short-term research grant webpage, I believe, but I'll just mention it here as well, is Grandel at DADDE. So let me just add that in here to the chat. Let's see, having a bit of issue finding the public chat.
And this live stream will also be uploaded to YouTube afterwards. So I can put that in the description bar also.
Yeah, that would be perfect. It looks like right now it's just taking the receptive end of it. But again, Grandel at DADDE, GRANDEL at DADDE. It'll also be, as Brenda mentioned, in the description there.
Yeah, well, perfect. So if there are no other questions, then I will say goodbye. Oh, Peter put it in the Facebook chat.
Our colleague there. Thanks so much, Peter.
Yeah. All right. Well, then I will say thank you, Ethan, for joining me. And we're planning another live streaming event for the faculty version of this. So the faculty version of the short-term research grant. So hopefully we'll see some of you there also in case you're interested in that. So
yeah, thanks so much for hosting, Brenda. Thanks so much to our colleague Peter for his assist in the comments and those really good questions. Thanks so much to all of you for your attention. Even though we weren't able to see you, it's a pleasure to join you here, receive your questions. Anything else that you're interested in, of course, feel free to reach out. We're happy to receive those later. And yeah, looking forward to your applications.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Have a great day, you guys.
Take care. Enjoy